KZSU-FM Stanford, welcome to another edition of Hearsay Culture on the newly launched Hearsay Culture Network. My name is Dave Levine. I'm a professor at Elon University School of Law, as well as an affiliate scholar at the Center for Internet and Society at Stanford Law School. And this year also affiliated with the University of North Carolina's Center for Information Technology and Policy. I'm very excited to have on someone that I have known for about 30 years to talk about a range of issues involving the information environment and political speech and what we're doing in our country when it comes to elections and voting and how we make decisions. Our guest today is Simon Rosenberg, formerly the president of the New Democrat Network, and now the host of the newly launched Hopium Chronicles. Simon founded NDN about 30 years ago, and I got to know him as a volunteer when I was in college on the Clinton campaign, but also a volunteer for the then also very new Concord Coalition, the organization founded by late Senators Paul Tsongas and Warren Rudman that focused on balanced budget issues in the federal deficit, but particularly present both at the time and now for me was focused on bipartisan or even nonpartisan policy efforts, which has been appealing to me for my entire adult life. Simon, too, has these credentials, having been working in national politics and media for over 20 years, starting his career in network television as a writer and producer for ABC News, before working on the Michael Dukakis campaign and then the Clinton campaign as well. He was, and I believe did appear in the movie involving the 1992 campaign, War Room. He then went to work at the Democratic National Committee, the Democratic Leadership Council, and started NDN in 1996. Particularly important for our discussion today, and I confirmed this with Simon just before we started, Simon may very well be the Democrat who has appeared the most on Fox News, with thousands of appearances in a space which anyone who has emerged from Iraq for more than 5 minutes knows is not a hospitable environment for Democrats. And so we're going to be talking about that experience, as well as some of the work that Simon has done in demographics and how to reach across constituencies, and also the most recent famous accolade that Simon has received, where he is one of the few people who correctly predicted that the expected red wave in 2022 in Congress would not appear. Lastly, and it's a long resume, but I want to mention this, he is also a member of the Aspen Institute's 2001 class of Henry Crown Fellows. He was on the 2004 Democratic National Convention Platform Committee and serves on the board of Tisch College for Citizenship, and Public Service at Tufts University. It's a long resume, Simon, and it may be embarrassing a little bit to you to fawn on, but it's important to know to whom we are talking. So, Simon, thank you for joining me today on Hearsay Culture.
Dave, it's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Or should I say professor?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's go with professor, but you can call me Dave for purposes of this show. So let's jump right in, Simon. I do want to talk immediately about this transition from the New Democrat Network to Hopium Chronicles, and you can talk a bit about what that is. By way of disclaimer, I am a subscriber, both because I can learn from it, but also because I am supportive, as one would be in this space, of people that are trying to break into a very busy and noisy environment in the podcasting newsletter space. So tell us a bit about this transition and about what you're doing with Hopium.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were two reasons, really. I decided to shut the organization down that I'd been running for many years and move to this new platform. One was that the old organization I ran was a 501c3 and C4. There's dramatic limitations of speech and activity in those kinds of organizations. And I felt that given the moment that we're in, where our democracy was in peril, that I needed more freedom to do and say what I felt needed to be done at this time to help make sure that freedom and democracy prevail here and everywhere, as I like to say. But the second thing is that I do think we are hurtling into this new, every 2 years, 4 years, we're reinventing the forum, the way we communicate evolves and changes. I think that I'm deeply concerned that the right has developed a information superiority over the center left in American politics, and that we need to figure out how to close that gap to get louder, as I call it. And I felt that the Substack platform was a place where I, particularly with the degradation of Twitter, where I had done a lot of my work over the years, that it provided a great platform for people who wanted to have thoughtful, intelligent discussion, also using very robust media tools as well. It's a very exciting kind of way of combining images and video and audio and traditional words into sort of a new way of communicating, which is very important for politics, because politics really is a game more of spoken English than written English, right? It's a, the basic thing in politics is a politician pitching a voter. And so, these tools about audio and video and the graphics and imagery that we can use make Substack a really, really powerful platform. And so finally, I guess, is that what Substack also allows is community. And, I now have close to 25,000 members in my community. It's very active. There's lots of conversations that go on. People share notes on ways that they do their work in politics. It's become a really dynamic and exhilarating in some ways experience to be part of a community of proud patriots who love their country, who are going to work to make things better. It's not just an intellectual or a debating society. It's a place where people do things and talk about how they do things. And that's been really gratifying. As someone who's been in the business a long time, it's really been great to be interacting with, not senators and congressmen every day, but regular people who care about their country. And so it's been great. And I really am grateful to Substack for having created, what I think is a new and powerful tool to advance civil discourse in the country, and to begin to try to reclaim some basic information integrity over a system that's been badly degraded.
So you come at this, as I mentioned in the introduction, with a long experience of even going back 30 years, trying to move large institutions in new directions. 30 years ago, while the Clinton campaign obviously was successful, Bill Clinton was very much an outsider in the literal sense, and his view of Democratic policy, party policy, was different than what we had seen in the 80s and 70s under people like Carter. Fast forward 30 years, and with the Substack platform, you're also trying to reach, as you just mentioned, a more diverse audience. I'm curious, before we get into social media and some of the other issues, what kind of skill set you think coming from politics and the New Democrat Network, right, and kind of what was derisively referred to at the time, right, as almost not Democrats and centrists and pro-business and all the terrible things that at the time were viewed as negative, what you take from that experience that translates here and what doesn't?
It's a great question, and let me come at it in a slightly unorthodox way, which is that I was part of a movement that changed a major American political party, right? We changed the ideology, the basic orientation of it, and it was in part based on an idea that the party had not been succeeding, that things had changed. We needed to update and modernize the way we viewed the world and our domestic politics. And I think we're at a similar moment. I think my old organization was built, almost 30 years ago to attack a bunch of problems that existed at that time. And today, I think we have new problems and new challenges that require the same kind of spirit in which we approached things 30 years ago, but not necessarily expecting to have the same outcomes. And we need a spirit of inquiry and openness and to solve, what I think are the two greatest challenges of our time, which is to prevent the planet from warming and to make sure that our democracy here and democracies everywhere prevail in a time of enormous challenge. These are not the things we were talking about 30 years ago. And so my old organization was built to go try to be innovative and create new solutions and new ideas for an old set of challenges. Now I think we need to go through that same process around these two new big challenges, using, of course, a very different kind of media environment. And as media changes, it allows, we need to reinvent the form as we do every 2 years. I do think, having spent some of my formative years working at ABC News and working in network television, created a very important grounding for me in terms of understanding media the evolution of media, the way that media isn't static, it's changing. The way we communicate and get our information is changing dramatically. We're moving ever further and further away from broadcast television into this next era. And I realized that I had to not just talk about it, I had to do it. And I had to actually myself kind of reinvent the way that I communicated to the outside world using some of these new tactics and tools. The most important being this idea of community, and that, in the broadcast age, or, with radio, right, it's a one-way communication, right? You're speaking out to people. In this new era, it's two-way, it's interactive, it's engaged, it's always on. And, I am in constant dialogue with members of my community all day long. And I love that about this new platform. And that just wasn't possible in the old media construct, right? So I think there's new challenges that require new solutions, and there's new ways that we all speak to one another, that I think are I think that I don't think there is significant enough understanding about how much the way that people in politics, people who are cared about politics, can engage now. The combination of Zoom, which has made it where you can be hanging out with a guy like Simon while you're making dinner in a live conversation, or this remote phone and texting capacity that allows you to call into swing districts anywhere in the country, even if you live in California. The barriers to entry for regular citizens into our politics have been dramatically lowered in recent years. And what's happened on the Democratic side, at least, is there's been a explosion of citizen activism. It's one of the reasons why we keep doing so well in our elections, why we keep performing at the upper end of what's possible in election after election, is because there are millions of people who are getting up every day now, heavily engaged in their democracy and their country in a way that just wasn't possible even 6 years ago. And so it's exciting for those of us who care about democracy, who care about strong, robust, healthy debate and discourse. I think we're seeing a real explosion of citizen engagement in our politics that may be unprecedented in our history as a country.
We're chatting with Simon Rosenberg, the host of the new Substack Hopium Chronicles on KZSU-FM Stanford and the Hearsay Culture Network. Simon, you just raised it, and I want to push in that direction for a moment, which is something we're going to talk about, which is the use of data. But also, you mentioned the Democratic Party's increasing power in this space. Someone that I talk to regularly, who's a Senate veteran, as recently as a few years ago, said to me how much this individual, who will go nameless as a source, felt like actually it was the Republican Party that was doing so much better in terms of data crunching and being sophisticated in this space. And this is someone who definitely leans Democrat, but I wouldn't call by any stretch a partisan, and would refer to projects going on in the basement of Hill buildings that were so far advanced from what this individual thought the Democrats were doing. Now, I'm not asking you to comment on that specifically, or of course the source, but I'm curious if there have been changes that have occurred as a result of COVID or as a result of this move towards the platform that would explain what is a different viewpoint than this person had mentioned to me, again, a few years ago now, but still current enough.
Listen, I think there are lots of views about what you just asked, and I'll give you my view, which is that what's happened in the Democratic Party is there has been an explosion of citizen activism because of a new set of tools that have made it easier for people to be engaged. And so our campaigns are outraising Republicans now regularly 3, 4, 5 to 1, in 2022, for example. We outperformed the Republicans dramatically in the early vote in 2022 because the size of the campaigns. I mean, our campaigns now are 2 to 3 times the size they were a decade ago, meaning that they can now have much more money to be able to reach into lower propensity voters, to turn them out, to grow, to increase our performance. And so the way that our party has evolved is that we've become more small d democratic, right? We've become more dependent upon the labor and the money of regular people rather than large institutions. The Republican Party's gone in the opposite direction. The Republican Party now, it's very common for campaigns to raise very little money and to have virtually all of their speech and communication being done by outside organizations that can take unlimited resources. They become more dependent upon a handful of of wealthy donors to fund and drive their campaigns, and we become more dependent upon regular people. In many ways, this is actually very reflective of the ideology of the two parties, right? That, the Democrats would like to believe that we are fighting hard for the middle class, the forgotten middle class, Dave, as we called it back 30 years ago, right? And Republicans seem to be more and more focused on serving a handful of very wealthy and privileged Americans. And our politics reflect that, right? I mean, if you look at the current run of politicians who are running for president, for example, as Republicans, most of them have far more money in their super PACs than they do in their campaign operations. And I can tell you that when the current system was constructed in 2002, there was never, I don't think there could have ever been a contemplation in the way that our current campaign finance system is set up that, for example, Ron DeSantis is using his super PAC for dated, things like his bus trips, which, in the Democratic Party, our lawyers would never have allowed anything like that because they become so much more dependent upon, $1 million, $5 million, $10 million checks. And therefore, so I think this is a really consequential thing that's happening. I don't think there's really an adequate understanding in the mainstream media every day how much the Democratic Party has really evolved in recent years. And by the way, many of the groups that are guiding this activity are not part of the party. They're homegrown organizations that grew up during COVID. They're, I spoke to a group last night that was based in Northern California that had 300 people. I'm speaking to a group in New Mexico tonight that's going to have probably 200 people. I spoke in the last few months. I've spoken to groups in North Carolina, in Virginia, in Minnesota, in Arizona, and many in New York and California. And there's been this very de Tocquevillian kind of explosion of networked Zoom-based organizations that are meeting on a weekly basis, who are taking action on behalf of their democracy. It's very exciting, and it's why I built Hopium, because I wanted to help all of these citizens around the country become more effective at what they do, because many of them were professionals in their daily lives and have now taken on politics as a late life hobby, and not a hobby, but a passion. And I felt that, instead of advising senators and congressmen, I'm now advising tens of thousands of advocates through Hopium. And it's been very gratifying to see, average Americans taking more control over their information destiny and their destiny of the American discourse, daily discourse, and also our politics.
So if I coin you as a consultant to the average American, in a positive sense, let's talk about what is, and you've alluded to it several times, right? Let's talk about social media, because clearly the perception is that social media is at least where the advocates are, and where the people that are locked into their positions with regard to party are. The role of social media in elections easily could be the rest of this conversation and the next several. But I want to drill down on the issue of the day, which is to me is the ability of social media companies to handle the complexity of political speech. We're recording on October 25th, 2023. As it still stands, Elon Musk is deciding what X, formerly known as Twitter, publishes. Mark Zuckerberg still has enormous influence, although Facebook is a little bit better in terms of filtering to decide what Facebook publishes, and on down the list. These are private companies making these decisions. What is your view on the power of social media companies over the entire information structure that we use, aside from places like Substack, to communicate? Because the government has more or less ceded, if they ever had that ground, right, because of the decline of broadcast television and to some degree the decline of radio as well in that space, to these private entities. Can social media companies handle this stuff? And what's your critique of what they're doing?
It's an enormous problem.
Yeah.
And having worked at an FCC regulated entity, in my younger years, I don't look, because of the First Amendment here in the United States. If you want to add to your litany of the challenges that we have, is that we have a very, very broad First Amendment here, which is not true in places like Europe, and that our understanding of free speech is extraordinarily broad by any kind of legal definition. I think that my view about this is that it's time now for our political leaders to figure out a regulatory framework that these companies can operate in. It isn't, I think that we have to start viewing this almost through a public health angle, that, the flooding, dark thoughts and dark information and dark sentiment into people's lives every day, and using algorithms and manipulation by bad actors, it's creating public health problems. I mean, we know that the explosion of teen depression is directly connected to this. And I think that the actions by the 41, I think it was, attorney generals in a coordinated fashion against Meta
just a
this week,
couple of days ago.
yeah, it's like a landmark moment, frankly, in the evolution of the need for our society to figure out how to do this. I mean, I don't have a prescription. I don't exactly know, but we need to do something. It's unacceptable.
And Simon, just to interrupt you, you're
Right.
referring to a lawsuit brought by 41 Democratic and Republican
Right.
state attorneys general that are basically making a full-throated argument that social media is bad for children, period.
Well, it's bad. It's bad for the public health of the country, right? And in this country, and let's just talk about the United States, is that it is contributing to the divisive discourse that we have. Are because of the loosening of content moderation, foreign governments who don't have our best interests at heart can play at a very high level of the game here in social media in a way that is asymmetrical. Right? We can't go into Russia, China, and Iran and do the kind of things they do to Americans because their systems aren't open. And it's outrageous to me that foreign governments are being allowed to essentially assault Americans every day. We wouldn't allow Russians to come in and throw Molotov cocktails through the windows of citizens. We shouldn't be allowing them to come in and spread false information around major events. We've got to do something. I don't know exactly how we're going to do this. We're going to have to navigate the rigors of the restrictions, the legitimate restrictions of First Amendment issues, but we need to do something. We're leaving Americans, essentially they're being assaulted through negative sentiment, negative speech, foreign manipulation. It's unacceptable. I set up the first countering disinformation operation ever at a major party committee at the DCCC in 2018. And so I've been in the front lines of this stuff. I'm on Twitter, so I get it every day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was hard being on Fox. Being on Twitter is a lot harder. And I think that we have to recognize that, even as hard, even as a veteran that I am in this game, right? When I have people attacking me on Twitter, you feel it, right? Like it hurts. It's not pleasant. It's not being thin-skinned. I mean, having people, say Hitler should have finished the job, or, all these things that happen on a daily basis on Twitter, these things are painful and harmful to our mental health. People who lived in a pre-social media society was never exposed to this kind of speech on a daily basis. And what's happened is that the greatest kind of window into this is what's happened with teen depression. I have 3 Gen Z kids, right, who have grown up in this world. And the teen depression issue, in the sense that they're always being filmed at every moment in their lives, they could do something that will haunt them for the rest of their lives, are not things, Dave, that you and I had to worry about when we were growing up, right? And I think that we have left our
I've thought of that, Simon, as I was thinking about earlier, there's no margin for error.
There's no margin for error.
Yeah.
You're constantly under film by people who don't have your best interests at heart, who can use it in a manipulated way against you at some point later in your life, right? And I think that we have to do more to first protect our kids than we're doing, but also to protect the American people and to have an honest conversation that the social media companies are not being responsible in the way they're approaching this. And second of all, that because of the nature of the openness of our society, we also have foreign actors who are daily involved in our discourse that are spreading negative sentiment, and that it's something we have to develop a strategy around. And I talk about this a lot in my own writing. I think, I admire, frankly, the European Union. They're much further ahead of us on this in talking about, as they describe it, hybrid war, or the dissolution of our information space. I refer to it as information integrity. It is one of the greatest challenges facing our country, without any doubt. And Elon Musk is not just somebody who's disabled content moderation. he's engaged personally in spreading outrageous levels of disinformation, hate speech himself. He's using his vast following to encourage the worst kind of behavior imaginable, anti-Semitic and other hate speech, divisive speech. We have to figure out a way as a country. We are better than this. We have to, without being overly restrictive, right? We have to be respectful of the First Amendment. We need a big conversation about this. It's urgent. And I'm grateful to the attorney generals for their, I think, what will be seen as a watershed moment in us reclaiming information integrity in the United States. It's going to be a long haul. But certainly, as you pointed out in our discussion beforehand, the advent of AI makes all this even more urgent, because the ability to produce, video and audio of high verisimilitude at scale is now, it already exists. It's not something that's going to happen. You're seeing tests being done of this by foreign governments in other parts of the world. You've already seen a rather significant escalation of fake imagery in the Hamas-Israel conflict just in the last few days. Enormous challenges ahead. And the most important thing we can do, Dave, is we need to start to develop a vocabulary, a language that's American-based, based on our law and our values, that talk about the need to restore integrity to our daily discourse. It's one of the reasons I started Hopium, is that I've become very aware that one of the goals of some of the bad actors in our society is to spread negative sentiment every day. They want Americans to feel bad about their country, their institutions, their leaders, each other. And part of the way we have to respond to that is being more conscious about spreading positive sentiment, about sticking to truth, and what is that there is an objective truth out there. Not everything is subjective. And I really believe this notion that there is an objective truth, that the sky is actually blue. You can argue that it's another color. That doesn't make it another color. That there is an objective truth is something that we have to not let go of, right? And this idea, one of the most pernicious parts of this new world, is this notion that that everything is subjective, and which is just not, in my view, not true, and it's frankly deeply dangerous.
We're chatting with Simon Rosenberg of the recently launched Hopium Chronicles on Substack, on KZSU-FM Stanford and Hearsay Culture and the Hearsay Culture Network. For those of you that listen to KZSU regularly, you know that KZSU is a nonprofit, non-commercial radio station at Stanford University. If you'd like to make a donation, please email our underwriting department at underwriting@kzsu.stanford.edu. And if you'd like to learn more about the Hearsay Culture Network and subscribe and be able to access new shows and hosts on the network, please reach us at hearsayculture.com. Simon, there's so much there in what you said. I want to touch on two of these things. First, of course, the law professor in me, and you didn't say this, but I want to be clear, right, does need to note that the First Amendment doesn't apply to social media companies, even because they're private, even though, of course, as you point out, we have an expectation of free speech. But the second point I want to raise and come back to you on is, and you mentioned the Israel-Hamas war, which is ongoing, is the speed with which information and no longer text but video is being shared even in war zones. Just yesterday, I clicked on a release by the Israeli Defense Forces of a 5-minute video, more or less, of the Israeli Navy firing at Hamas terrorists that were trying to enter Israel via sea. And it struck me that if I wasn't paying close attention, it looked and felt a lot like a video game. You have kind of first-person video of the IDF firing at Hamas terrorists in the sea. And of course, although they haven't fully materialized, Hamas threatened to release videos of the execution of Israeli civilians as a means of promulgating war and, of course, promulgating fear. And we are left with these private entities, as you allude to, being the arbiters of whether that information is going to be shared or not. Putting aside the fact that some of these companies are, like Telegram, are outside the realm of the United States, what we're talking about here, to me, is the ultimate challenge to the concept of free speech. Because when you mention the EU and you mention the AI Act and the GDPR, and I don't want to get into the weeds of that either, right? There's a history in Europe of wanting to quash some speech because of obviously the history of Nazism and the Holocaust. And so if you post the swastika online in France, you're going to run into problems in a way that you won't hear. Which begs the question, right? Are we past the point where we can, in your view, in light of your experience in politics and social media, are we past the point where we can go with the old cherished notion that the truth will out, that we allow speech to combat other speech, and in that way people can understand what is true? Are we incapable of handling that kind of power intelligently in light of the environment that we're in today?
I mean, I think the problem with all of that kind of worldview is that is the fact that there are malevolent actors in the game, right? That there are large nation states and large entities. I mean, look, what we learned last year in the Fox News, court, the trial that happened, is that Fox News is a Republican political organization masquerading as a news organization. And so the entire premise of Fox is a lie. It is a propaganda. It is the most powerful Republican. It's far more powerful than the RNC, for example. And yet we are going along every day and pretending like it's a news organization. They still get White House press credentials. They go to the White House every day, even though they've admitted in open court that they're a Republican organization masquerading as a news organization. And I think the level of deception that, I think it's hard for many Americans who believe in democracy, that at the core of democracy is a respect of voters and of citizens, that you're going to speak honestly with them because they deserve to know the truth. But we now have a situation where there are very large, powerful entities who are intentionally creating false information and spreading it through our ecosystem in the United States in a way that's perhaps without precedent. I mean, I'm not willing to accept that the newspaper wars of the early 19th century, right, and the propaganda wars is the same as this. I just don't, because video and audio are much more powerful, and imagery and photographs are much more powerful means of communicating. So I don't accept that this is just another version of things that we've seen before. I think we're in an unprecedented moment, and I think that I'll give you another example of this, is that I'm very active on Twitter. I have a large following. I'm aggressive in my communication. And the weekend that the war broke out was the worst weekend I've ever had on Twitter in terms of the amount of people attacking me that were clearly inauthentic. It was I blocked thousands and thousands and thousands of accounts.
By inauthentic, you mean bots, or you mean?
Well, I mean, you don't have to be without getting into the weeds on terminology, is that not everything's a bot, right?
Okay.
It is because a bot implies a robotic form. It also can be a person operating as a false identity and a false, I think one of the things, Dave, for you is that as you think about all this, one of the areas that I think we have to really focus on in terms of solutions is limiting the amount of fraudulent representation that happens every day. The concept of fraud, I think, is really important to look at social media, because we don't tolerate the degree of fraud that happens on social media every day in the rest of our life, right? If you fraudulently represent yourself to somebody in the mail or over the phone, there can be legal consequences. And on social media, there isn't. And it's my view that 95% of the negative speech that I get back is fraudulent. These are accounts representing themselves to be something other than what they are. Some of them are robotic and have been programmed to react to certain things. Some of them are also, there's a person behind it who are manipulating it in real time. And because at the end of the day, so I had more negative comments in that 3-day period, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, than I've had in any period that I was in Twitter, even though I've had many times where I've had far more views. And so what it meant was that there was some kind of decision made by some set of people to significantly jump into the information stream on Saturday, Sunday, Monday after the war began. And what was amazing to me is the most common thing that I posted that got the negative sentiment back was my argument that Tommy Tuberville needed to release the holds on his Pentagon appointments so that we could have a fully staffed Pentagon in a time of conflict. Believe it or not, that was the thing that generated the most comments of people saying, no, what he's doing is legitimate and true. Now, who would make that argument, right? Who would defend preventing the Pentagon from being fully staffed? Russia.
Well, right, but people that view life, right, or the protection of life as conceived by the anti-abortion movement as being paramount, right?
Well,
I mean, isn't that the conflict?
It's Russia. I mean, it's foreign governments.
Well, okay, fair enough.
You know that. I mean,
I should have said who legitimately might, even though you could debate the point. Yeah.
So I mean, the point is, this was clearly foreign nation state. The volume of it, and then the thing that was disturbing about it was that on Tuesday morning, Elon gets his letter from the European Union raising questions about whether he was doing enough, and then all this activity just stopped. It stopped. There was no long tail, right? It wasn't like it was 80% on Monday, 60% on Tuesday, 40% on Wednesday. On Tuesday, it just stopped.
Which is, of course, we've seen that with everyone from Elon Musk to Julian Assange, right, who used to get a lot of press, where free speech exists for everything except talking about them or impacting their interests in negative ways. Yeah, no, I want to come back to something you said earlier with regard to Fox News, because I think listeners might see a dichotomy in simultaneously having been on Fox News thousands of times, that I do want to play what is maybe your most famous clip and get your reaction to it in a few minutes. While at the same time,
we can skip that. We can. We don't have enough time. I don't think we have enough time.
We'll play 30 seconds of it because I want to get your take on that experience. But right, you've got to. Do you have a dichotomy, or how would you explain simultaneously being on Fox News for a few thousand times at least, while describing it, as you just did a few minutes ago, as a lying, party-driven machine?
Because I think it changed. I think that after Trump was elected, Fox changed. I was there during all that. I was on all the time. And the combination of Roger Ailes, the original founder of Fox, who was a Republican political operative who, built Fox to never allow Watergate to happen ever again. That was the explicit goal of Fox News, was to defend a Republican president the next time they committed a horrendous scandal. It's kind of an interesting reason to start a television network. But when Ailes was removed because of the sex scandals that he was involved in and then shortly died, it happened right around the time that Trump got elected. And I think that Fox went from being fair and balanced, where I went on the air every time I went on the air, I got to say my piece, right? It may have been adversarial and tough, but I was allowed to speak. And I felt as long as I could say my piece, then it was worth the time. I could show Republicans that there are reasonable Democrats out there, cross the party line, cross over, have civilized speech, right? As much as possible. Sometimes a little hard because it got too adversarial, right? But I did it. But then Fox changed, and Fox became far more overtly propagandistic. There are barely any Democrats on now. They dropped the fair and balanced, frame. That's no longer how they describe themselves, right? And they went from viewing Democrats as opponents to Democrats being adversaries. And there was an incredible, I witnessed it during my time there, and there was an ideological change. And I think that Fox became much more of and also it moved even further into a realm of chaos and illiberalism, which I don't think was always a core part of Fox. I mean, Fox was, for the most part, for a long time, a very kind of conventional Republican point of view. Now, you've got Sean Hannity working to get Jim Jordan elected as speaker, right? Just last week, embracing the most far right of the candidates, the most chaos-inducing candidates. And I think Hannity, before we're getting into the weeds here a little bit, but before Ailes was removed, Hannity was on his way out. Hannity was getting shoved out, and because he was seen as too extreme, right? And now he's like the heart and soul. He and Tucker Carlson, the heart and soul, or was heart and soul of the network. And so I do think that I'm just reporting to you what Fox themselves said in the trial that took place, that they viewed themselves as a Republican organization advancing Republican interests, not and of which they had this veneer, this false veneer of being a news organization. And I think at some point we have to stop going along with the ruse, right? I mean, this is a ruse, this is a deception. And it isn't something that we have to continue. And yeah, it pains me. I still have friends who work there. There are many anchors that were there that I have stayed in touch with who are good people. But the network itself has become a malevolent force. I mean, there's no question
Well,
in
and
my
just to interrupt you
yeah,
here, Simon, just
yeah.
in the interest of time, because we have about 15 minutes, I do want to I want to get your reaction to this before we move into kind of the bridge building that is something that we both work in and which is met with challenges. You know, the beginning of the end, as it were, might have been right in 2017, obviously after Trump was elected. And I want to play this clip very quickly of you on the show that was hosted by Melissa Francis, who is no longer at Fox News because of allegations she made with regard to equal pay. And I don't want to get into any of those. And I have no individual information on it, nor am I asking you about it. But I want to play this clip and get your reaction because this is where it got testy and where you finally said, I'm not going to be on your show again. Let me play a short clip from it.
While you do that, I'm going to get up for 1 second.
Yeah. And so, Simon, the point of this is not to relive an unhappy memory, but to get your reaction to this style of news, quote unquote, news reporting, which is very not only adversarial, but also doesn't convey much except the drama of human emotion. You later on said, I'm not going to be on that show again. And so my question here for this is, right, what do you take from that experience that people who are consuming the news or trying to consume the news in a way from sources that are accurate, right, that offer context that would be useful, aside from not watching Fox News, as someone who was in it and had to deal with this kind of exchange on national television?
Yeah, I mean, look, what was that was my last appearance on Fox because I realized that after that appearance I couldn't go back. And you should know that the producer of the show called me and apologized. The executive producer of the show called me and apologized. I got 3 phone calls within a half an hour because I was a regular guest and a well-regarded regular guest. So the network repeatedly apologized to me. And then Melissa Francis went on Twitter and started liking people attacking me for that interview. And she started egging people on to go after me. And so the anchor after that exchange encouraged violent speech against me, all afternoon. She spent hours commenting and pushing people to attack me on Twitter, which was the reason I quit Fox. The reason I really quit Fox was that she broke out of her role as anchor, fair and balanced anchor, and started encouraging people to go after me on Twitter, which was just such an obvious where the hell were we at that point as a this isn't a news organization anymore. And so she knew that she had screwed up. And instead of owning it and apologizing like the rest of the network did, she encouraged people to attack me, and which was just unbelievable to me, right? And so, to be honest, one of the main reasons I stopped going on Fox is that I felt physically unsafe. I started feeling increasingly that the level, of vitriol that was being stoked. Sorry, I have a dog here. The level of vitriol being stoked by, when an anchor goes onto social media and starts an anchor, because keep in mind that that exchange that you had was with the anchor. It
Right.
wasn't with
Right.
the other guest.
Right.
In the old Fox, the anchors would not engage like that. In Fair and Balanced Fox, it was very rare that you would have those kinds of engagements. And in the new Fox, they were unleashed. So it was 2 against 1. And when you're on a show like Fox, when the anchor turns on you, right, the audience gets very hostile. And so I would work very, very hard to always be very polite and everything else, because you're a guest in their house, in essence, right? And you need to be respectful to their audience. She broke that respect in that segment. And what happened is, when that happens, the audience then really turns on you. And social media, that's it. In the old days before social media, it didn't really matter that much. You'd get a letter in the mail or threatening phone call. Having thousands and thousands of people, being stoked by a Fox News anchor to come after you is dangerous stuff,
Yeah.
and so I really feel, look, I will say that I knew Megyn Kelly very well, and Gretchen Carlson, and I went on O'Reilly's show many times, had very many respectful engagements on O'Reilly, right? Melissa Francis was absolutely the worst anchor that I ever went on, and wild and unpredictable and not connected to data and facts at all. And then in that segment, if you recall, what happens at the end is she asked me to go out and have a drink with her,
Right.
which is, I mean, imagine if a man had done that to a woman on air, right? Like the outrage that would have created, like, oh yeah, no biggie, let's just go out and party together, right? I mean, it was crossed an unbelievable line, right, of professionalism and so can we break for 1 second? And yeah,
Yes.
let me just, I'm
Yeah.
sorry about this.
Yeah.
So Dave, what happened after that incident was that in the car leaving, I got calls from the producer of the show, the executive producer of the show, apologizing. So Fox went on record saying that the behavior of the anchor was inappropriate in that segment. I was a respected guest who had been going on for many years, and it was just a symptom of, I think, how Fox really had veered from viewing Democrats as opponents or people they didn't agree with to being adversaries. And I think that clip was a very good example of that. It was, and I think also there was a lack of professionalism by the anchor, which was part of this whole change of opponent to adversary, right? I mean, if somebody's your adversary, you're less respectful to them. It's not just a more hostile, but there's less respect conveyed, right? And so it is, I do think that Fox has changed a lot. And that was my last appearance on Fox. I realized that, if I said on the air that I'm not going to be on your show ever again, Fox couldn't really have me on, because guests can't say that. It's not up to me to make that decision. And so respectfully, I just felt that it was time, after many years, I had done my duty. It was time for others to come forward at Fox, but that it had become so, there are two things that had made it very difficult. One is the adversarial nature, where the anchor themselves were getting much more involved, as opposed to being neutral arbiters. They were becoming much more engaged in the discourse, as you heard. But the other thing that changed was that after Trump, the Republican Party itself changed and became much more, went down these journeys of conspiracy theories and everything else. And there were times where I was on Fox where they would bring things up that they said happened that I didn't even know what they were talking about, right? Like, I became, the ability for me to cross the chasm, to be able to sort of keep up with the story that they were telling, because often this story was not fact-based. It was delusional. It was, as my friend Greg Sargent in the Washington Post calls it, Foxlandia, right? This sort of imaginary place that doesn't exist in the real world. It became harder and harder to engage in respectful conversation, because I literally sometimes had no idea what they were talking about, even though I'm in the game every day, right? Because it was not based on reality and fact, and it was these stories that were being told. So Fox has really, I think, lost its bearings and become, far more dangerous than just a right-wing propaganda outlet. It's become something that's was, I mean, look, the reason they were taken to court, the reason we know so much about their inner workings is that Fox actively promoted an insurrection against the United States government. That's just a fact. It's not my opinion. That's determined by law. And it is amazing that there isn't any broader civil kind of societal penalty for a major institution in our life for having actively promoted an insurrection against the United States government. And here they are, still stumbling along as without any real kind of societal probobium, any kind of condemnation other than a penalty fine that they paid, right? And so
And
I
that's
just look.
where that's where to interrupt you. I mean that's where we are, right? I mean, in terms of what you were saying about being threatened for expressing opinions that contravene the viewpoints of large groups of people, and many people have these experiences today in social media of expressing opinion and being threatened with physical violence, and some experience physical violence. On top of that, we have this environment. You've mentioned several times, we have about 10 minutes left. You've mentioned several times, and I want to talk about this in the last 10 minutes, the focus on facts and evidence, which animates hearsay culture as well. And based upon your unusual at the time prediction that Democrats would do better in 2022, you said something interesting as you were labeled simultaneously the most optimistic Democrat online by Politico prior to the election, and then praised by a variety of outlets for seeing the future, right? In that sense, you said something very interesting on X, Twitter, that I want to ask you about. You in response to some data that was shared post-election, you said we don't have a data problem in this election, we have an analysis problem. And talk about that a little bit. What is the analytical problem specifically there? But more importantly, do we have an analysis problem writ large in our society?
Yeah, I mean, wow, how do I get into this? What I meant,
And do it in about 3 or 4 minutes.
I know, it's not
Yeah.
easy because I haven't talked about this in a long time.
Uh-huh.
What I meant by that is that the data was not all pointing in the same direction. There was data showing red wave, but there was a lot of data showing a close competitive election. And so the data wasn't the problem. It was the people doing the analysis of the data that fell into kind of this facile, sort of herd of the red wave, that they felt pressure, I think, because others were doing it, that they had to kind of jump in, even though there was a lot of data showing there was no red wave coming, that there became, I think that social media has reinforced herd mentality in journalists, that it's a safer place to go if other people are there, because when you step out, there's more penalty because you get attacked on social media. And I think that risk taking in public commentary now is much harder than it used to be, because there's organized, people come after you, and particularly if it's in a way that goes against the interests of Republicans, who are, far more aggressive in social media and challenging, these kinds of things. They're much more adversarial in their nature and in this matter. And I know that not everybody will agree with that, but that's my professional opinion. And so I think that journalists kind of got, they got because the right-wing noise machine was spewing out red wave every day, they kind of got bullied into a place that they shouldn't have been bullied into. There should have been more resistance to it. And I even went on MSNBC on October 31st before the election, and I called out the political commentary saying, I think you guys are falling for a fake Republican narrative and you need to do better. Those of you who do this for a living need to be more honest about the data that we're seeing, that it isn't all pointing towards a red wave. And much of the red wave data was actually through a manipulated process of Republican polls that were flooding the zone with fake polls that pushed the averages to a place that they wouldn't have gone otherwise. And when I did that, there was an enormous backlash. And I had prominent commentators that your listeners would know on a first name basis call me. One of them on MSNBC called me a conspiracy theorist. Another said I was using astrology in my analysis. Another one, Nate Silver, famously said I was spreading hopium, that I was a hopium purveyor and, delusional in my belief, that I was faulty. And, and so the backlash to me calling out the political commentators for having been played by the Republicans was fierce. I mean, among people that had been friends of mine for 30 years, right? And what's tragic for me is that, they all stuck with the red wave. I stuck to my guns on what I was seeing. Thankfully, as a Democrat, I was right. But essentially, the entire class of political commentators in America failed in 2022. It's an extraordinary thing that happened. And it's one of the reasons that I began Hopium, because I became more convinced at that point that the problems we have in our information space were actually graver than I understood. As much as I know this stuff and lived it, been on Fox and everything else, the fact that so many really smart people got so heavily played, and then fought. And by the way, there's been almost no public accountability since the election. There have been two moments of accountability. One was the New York Times did a remarkable story about the fake red wave that aired, that ran unfortunately on Christmas Day in 2022, so it wasn't widely seen. And the other was ABC parting ways with Nate Silver, which was a direct result of his I think being comfortable being manipulated through polling. He had a whole justification for it, and then fighting it. But there was some accountability, but there wasn't a sufficient amount of accountability. And we have a long way to go. And so what I mean by that is part of what we did is we looked beyond polling and looked at other data to expand our aperture of what was, and the fact that we looked at this other data like performance in special elections, fundraising, performance in the early vote, registration numbers, was derided and denigrated by the people that have made a living looking at polling. And as the New York Times article points out, the problem with polling now is that it's gotten, because of the low response rates, it's gotten very expensive to do a good poll. So the percentage of polls that are in the system that are either partisan polls or junkie polls has gone up significantly.
Yeah.
And the people who make a living off of this aren't being honest with us about how the basis of their social standing and their income and their influence is increasingly on very shoddy ground. And it's a huge challenge because these people have an enormous influence over how we see American politics. I mean, the DCCC, the House Campaign Committee, believes that the recurrence of the red wave at the very end cost them the House because they lost money that was supposed to go to them, that was redirected to other places because they thought the House was lost because of the reporting that happened. So this stuff had real world consequences. I mean, this isn't just a parlor game or an interesting thing to be talking about on a radio show. It may have altered the outcome of our democracy and may, for example, cause, Ukraine to not get funded, in the next few months. So the consequences for world history could be significant because a handful of commentators got played by Republicans and have never really taken accountability for it. So I became, as somebody who's been in the game for 30 years and been on national media every day since I was the spokesperson of the DNC since 1993, I have became convinced that this problem we have with manipulation of our discourse, bad actors, bad information, disinformation, misinformation, is a much bigger problem than we all understand, and it needs, we need to deal with it as a country. It's hurting our democracy, it's hurting our body politic, it's hurting the mental health of our citizens. We need to do better.
And in the time we have, I'm going to ask you a really hard question that we have about 2 minutes on, and I know you want to talk about some efforts you're making to build these bridges, despite all the challenges of people communicating, which is, of course, the role of generative artificial intelligence. Right now, we've got this new additional, what we referred to in the past as deep fake problem, but now it's a much bigger problem. It's the creation of entirely new narratives through video, through text. So this is a hard question in 2 minutes that we have left. Simon, what's your quick take on AI and whether we can deal with AI? And then more broadly, what are you doing yourself to build those bridges?
I was on an early briefing with Microsoft. They briefed a bunch of us in DC about AI when it was coming out. And I asked the question, what is your thinking about how this is what you're going to do to protect people in politics? And they said, we have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, literally, that was the answer.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Very, very, very comforting.
Yeah. No, we have no idea. But we're going ahead, right? It's like the equivalent of, we don't have an FDA, right, over technology in America. And look, the thing I'm most worried about with AI is not the video, the audio, it's the volume. It's the ability for AI, as I witnessed. I think I may have been an early, warrior in the AI battles in that weekend. The volume of the attacks on me. It was the amount, the ability to flood the zone and overwhelm the system with a false narrative or a false attack or to challenge someone's integrity. That's my greatest fear about AI in the short term, is the ability to create massive volume over days, over a sustained period of time, through multiple accounts, hundreds of postings. It is, because you can light a fire and then you can walk away. The way this works, and I'll be just to end, is that I call them Marines. It's the people that hit the disinformation beaches first. They light the fire, and then the fire burns through regular citizens and gets carried. The ability to light that fire is greater today now because of AI than it's ever been, where a meme can be spread to millions of people, and then people spread it. And there's no way to stop that, right? That's not something we're ever going to, once people themselves, regular, real people, but that ability to take something that's false and put it out there in a way with incredible velocity and in a way that can't be stopped, right? Because it just then goes viral, as we call it. That's the thing that worries me more than anything else. And I feel like what I witnessed a few weeks ago was something that I had never felt before. The ferocity, the intensity of the engagement with me was unlike anything I had experienced ever in Twitter. And remember, I'm on Twitter every day. I have, same number of posts, same subject matter, but something rose up in that 3-day period and fundamentally altered the game. And I think it was a test. And what worries me is that it happened around an international incident. And then what worries me more than anything else is that on Tuesday morning, it just stopped, like a switch turned off, which showed how fundamentally artificial it all was. And it's worrisome.
And Simon, I hate to end on this concerning note, although it animates both the Hopium Chronicles, which you've launched on Substack, and for which I am a subscriber, and of course my launch of Hearsay Culture back in 2006 and the new Hearsay Culture Network. Our guest today, Simon Rosenberg of Hopium Chronicles. Thank you, Simon, for your candor and for diving into these issues. Obviously, we only covered about half of the topics, as I expected we might, that I wanted to talk about. So I invite you back soon on the show. But more importantly, right now, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it. And I just do want to end on a note of hope and optimism that I think that these are solvable problems, but we got to get about solving them.
And so maybe that's the next show. What do the solutions look like? You're listening to KZSU-FM Stanford and Hearsay Culture. Thank you for listening today. Please stay tuned for more diverse programming and have a great day.